Hello everyone, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, Jakarta time. Let's me introduce first myself. So my name is Zezen Zainal Mutaqin. I'm a lecturer at the Faculty of Islamic Studies, Universitas Islam International Indonesia. I was actually graduated from Melbourne Law School in 2011 for my law and legal master, and I did my science of juridical doctor from the University of California in Los Angeles in United States. So currently I'm teaching here at the Indonesian International Islamic University on subject like Islamic laws and international law and other related subject, which is mostly on history and Islamic history and civilizations and Islam and the principle of moderations. I was asked by the organizer to give a short lecture on the overview of Indonesian legal system and its interplay with the other legal system in Indonesia, which is Islamic law and also adat law, or what we call customary law. In Indonesia, customary law is called also as adat law. Adat is, of course, is taken from the Arabic word, or it's taken from the tradition of Islamic law. Adat mean is custom. Al-adatul muhakkama, for example, in Arabic legal system, in terminology of Arabic legal system, which mean that customs constitute laws. And from that word, actually, in Indonesia, by the Dutch historians and by Dutch legal scholars, adat was used to refer to a specific customary laws exist in Indonesian archipelago. So to guide through all my presentation, I would like to share screen of my presentations. Hopefully, you can get a much better overview of the presentation that I will deliver. So this is my presentation for around maybe 30 minutes. Of course, it's very difficult to present something that is very complicated, to present something that is very rich historically in 30 minutes presentation, but I will do my best just to give the student who will be coming to Indonesia to have an overview of what is the Indonesian legal system is and what is the foundations of the current Indonesian legal system, which is normally around the discussions on adat law, national and Islamic law. As I said, adat is a specific terminology within Indonesian legal system that refers to what we call the customary law. Okay, I will try to share my screen. So maybe let's start the discussion with the very basic and very foundational ideas on what is really actually Indonesia, what Indonesia actually is, because later on, when you go to the legal system, you will really understand the reason why the current Indonesian legal system exists is actually starting from the elaboration on what Indonesia is. So Indonesia as a nation, or Indonesia as a state, is actually something that is an entity that is very, very new. As everybody know, Indonesia before 1945 was even never exist, not exist yet. Indonesia is an idea of a nation and a state is actually started October 2028, when all young activists from all around the country gather in Java to have what they call Sumpah Pemuda, or the declarations of the youth to start thinking about the formulations or the establishment of new state. Of course, we have to remember that time in the context of colonialisms, but basically as a nation state, as a new colonial state, Indonesia was not exist until 1945. The ideas, of course, started 1920s. But at that time, people normally refer to Indonesia with different names. The Dutch, for example, call Indonesia as East Indies instead of, for example, Nusantara or Nusa Hindia, as Indonesians classical writing refer to themselves. Western Dutch European or the Portuguese normally call Indonesian archipelago that now become a part of the Indonesian state as Indies or East Indies. The reason for that is because for them, Indonesia is just like part of the Indian subcontinent, but located in most eastern part of Indonesia. So that's why in most, let's say, pre-1940s writings about this archipelago, you will find a lot about what we call East Indies. Even if you go to the classical, let's say, historical books of the Islamic classical period, normally this area is called as East India as well. Just for you to remember that is actually at that time, of course, the East Indies as a geographical location was located within the framing of colonial power as part of Indian subcontinent, in which since centuries ago, these areas of this archipelago was considered as one of the richest place on planet in terms of spices, and that's why people come here to the archipelago actually to get spices. Yeah, we know that in Indonesia we have what we call spicy island, for example, in Maluku, in the current Maluku area. So, but nevertheless, what I want to say is actually Indonesia as a nation state is a new project. It just started in 1945. Before that, of course, we have very rich, long historical evolutions as a nations, but as a state and as a nation is a really new one. So because of that, if you want to study about Indonesian legal system, you have to study a history of Indonesia and how the history of Indonesia, which exists as a nation before 1945, is contested. And history as in Indonesia as the state and history of Indonesia as the nations. Before Indonesia was created, of course, we have multi-nations, let's say, exist in Indonesia, or we call what we call it tribes or ethnicity. If you see to the current data, for example, we have at least 314 languages spoken in the Indonesian archipelago from Aceh all the way to Papua, which means that at least you can, if you see language as a symbol of culture, then we can conclude that at least we have 314 ethnic and sub-ethnic group, for example. So those ethnic group actually have their own sovereign before the colonial power came to the archipelago. So sovereign power in the form of sultanate in most cases, or even kingdoms. Of course, one of the most famous historical kingdom that we learned from our history was the big and very strong empire like Sriwijaya was located in Sumatra, which covers almost all Southeast Asia, and also Majapahit, which is located mostly in Java. But also the power of the Majapahit is actually the power of the location, the geographical location is just like the Sriwijaya, encompassing almost all area of Southeast Asia. If not, most of them are under Sriwijaya or Majapahit. And after that, we have Sultanate from Aceh all the way to Maluku and Papua. When the Portuguese came, when the Dutch came to Indonesia, and they actually encounter rebellion, resistance and cooperations from those sultanates because those sultanates has already had their own sovereign, all with others, requirement that will considered as entity that hold a sovereign, or what we call a state in a modern context, which they have army, they occupy certain territory with all the people inside it, and the law exists. And what is really interesting is actually in each sovereign or pre-colonial, let's say, sovereign in Indonesia, they have also their own law. That is very important for us to know. So that's kind of, broad, very broad historical introductions on what is Indonesia. So this is basically a map of what we call the languages and ethnic groupings in Indonesia. So from Aceh to Papua, if you crop that map and you put the map in the United States, it's basically just like you are going from Seattle all the way to Boston or all the way to the East Coast. So the length, geographical length from the very western part of Indonesia all the way to Papua. If you take direct flight from Aceh, for example, to Papua all the way, it may take around 8 hours flight, or 7 to 8 hours flight, meaning that it's just like flight from Jakarta to, I don't know, to the Middle East, for example. So this is, imagine Indonesia is a very huge country with 17,000 islands, with hundreds of ethnic groups and hundreds of languages exist. Of course, for Australian, most of the students know Bali, but Bali is only a very small, tiny dot among 17,000 island and archipelago. And it is, of course, Indonesia is much broader and much larger geographical entity, much bigger than Bali. So here the simplification, I have to comment simplification because of for the interest of the time. This is basically something that I have been explained to you before. If we want to study about Indonesian law, you have to really dig into the history of Indonesia and to the formations of Indonesia as a nation state. So historically, if you want to study about Indonesian history, people normally divided the history of Indonesia into 3, let's say, big periodizations. The first one is 5th to 17th centuries. The second one is from 16th all the way to 19th century, and post-19th century or 20th century and 21st century. From 5th century all the way to 16th century, we call it as pre-colonial period. And 16 to 19, we call it a pre-colonial period. And let's say independent movement or post-colonial period. Of course, the periodization is debated whether Portuguese or other European powers came to Indonesia was in around 15th century or 16th century or 14th century. It's debatable, but let's avoid those complication by sticking to very simple periodizations. We have what we call pre-colonial, colonial, and independence. During pre-colonial period, of course, we know that Indonesian archipelago was actually divided into several kingdoms, mostly based on Hindu and Buddhist traditions, or Hindu-Buddhist empire. And that's mostly exists until 13th centuries, 14th centuries. After 13th, 14th centuries, 11th centuries, Muslim sultanate started also to exist in the archipelago along the process of Islamization that took place from 11th century by Sufis and by the traders from the Middle East. If you see that picture on the top is the picture of what we call the Borobudur Temple. Borobudur Temple is the biggest temple in the world, the biggest Buddhist temple in the world, and it was built by Sailendra dynasty in 7th century. So it's one of the oldest, actually, let's say, cultural heritage that we have. If you connect it with the other tradition, for example, the building of the Borobudur Temple is actually similar to the period of the Abbasid and the Umayyad and the Abbasid in the Middle East. Abbasid and Umayyad and Abbasid, if you learn history of Islam, for example, was also considered as the foundational period for Muslim civilization. So in Indonesia, at the time of the Prophet passed away and at the time of the Umayyad dynasty exists, we have also Sailendra dynasty and other dynasty started to to reach their peak of civilizational achievement. For example, by building a huge, magnificent temple in Yogyakarta that you can visit when you go to Indonesia. Yogyakarta is only 1 hour or 2 hours from Yogyakarta. It's a huge Buddhist temple. This is part of the legacy of what we call pre-colonial period. So in the pre-colonial period, we have Hindu element, we have Buddhist element, but we have also Islamic element within what we call pre-colonial culture. And then the colonialism exists, took place everywhere, not only in Indonesia. I think in most of the third world country, whether it's in Latin America, whether in Africa, in Asia, a European power come to that land, to that archipelago, of course, with the doctrine which is very familiar for Australian student, the doctrine of terra nullius. Terra nullius mean, as you know, is basically land that belong to no one. So because the land is not belong to no one, then those who claim by putting their flag in that land will claim their sovereignty, and then because you claim the sovereignty, then you appropriate that land, become part of you. Then you basically take that land based on the notion of terra nullius doctrine. So interestingly, if you read the history of international law, when the Portuguese come to Indonesia through the trading route that they have learned from the Arab merchants in late 9th and 11th, all the way to 11th century, the Portuguese also come to Indonesia, asserting that their right that Indonesia is still not considered as a land with the sovereign, and because of that, they assert their ownership to the Indonesia. They want to appropriate Indonesia, and they want to own Indonesia through what we call colonizations, by saying that this land is belong to the Portuguese. So again, based on the doctrine of terra nullius. Of course, this was something that is very much debated within the traditions of Islamic tradition of international law. If you study, for example, Hugo Grotius' books on the law of free sea, for example, or law on booty, arm and booty, I forget the exact title, but most of the Hugo Grotius books, which is become the foundation of international law, is actually rebuting the claim of the Portuguese, who say that the archipelago in Indonesia or in Nusantara is terra nullius, or not, land belong to no one, and because of that, Portuguese assert their ownership to the land by saying, for example, Hugo Grotius saying that although the sovereign that exists in Nusantara is not the Christian sovereign, which is not recognized by the Portuguese. So the Portuguese is holding the very classical terra nullius doctrine by saying that even if there is a sovereign exists in the world, but the sovereign is not part of the Christian family, then they will not recognize the sovereignty. And because they don't recognize the sovereignty, then they think that the land is not belong to anyone, so they can assert a ownership. While Grotius, for example, rebuting that claim, saying that, look, as long as there is sovereign, even if the sovereign is not part of the Christian family, we have to respect the sovereign, because the sovereign exists with the army, with the all these functionary with the functions that state exists. So, and because of that, actually, there is huge debate in Europe at the time with the case of what we call Saint Katrina case, in which one big ship in Riau near Singapore was captured by the Dutch, belonged to Portuguese and captured by the Dutch, and the Dutch brought that cargo ship to Amsterdam and sold it. The cargo was sold in Amsterdam, and it's very lucrative cargo and very rich cargo ship. And because of that, they create huge controversy, and Hugo Grotius was asked by the Dutch administration to basically to prepare a legal apologia or legal defense on behalf of the Dutch. The argument of the Grotius at the time is argument in which he departed from the Christian and using reason and rationality to argue on international law. And because of that, we know that Hugo Grotius was become the father of international law. All those debates actually took place in the case of the debate that was debated by Grotius, which actually took place in archipelago of Indonesia, which is in Sumatra near the Malacca Strait. So for those who are For those who like international law, maybe you can revisit and restudy again those history of international law. But my point is that the colonization period exists through the coming of the three superpower, which is Portuguese, the Dutch, and later on the British Empire to Indonesia. Of course, the whole purpose of those European power come to Indonesia is actually for getting raw materials, especially spices, coffee, and tea. All these island all these islands are very rich island, and they basically get all those spicy to Europe as part of their empire. Until, of course, we know that the colonizations ended around late 19th centuries. In Indonesia, we declare our independence in 1945, although the Dutch initially recognized Indonesian independence 1948 or 49, but later on the Dutch also recognized Indonesian independence in 1945. But what is really interesting, with these two periods, Indonesian history adding one more layer to its historicity. As I said, the layer of pre-colonial period is the layer of law of Hinduism, Buddhism, and Islamic, let's say, traditions. With the coming of the European, you add more layer to that historicity of Indonesia, what we call, let's say, Western Christian traditions to Indonesia. And interestingly, during the independence movement in the early 20th centuries, mid 20th centuries, Indonesians' founding fathers was actually debating on what kind of legal system that they will adopt they would adopt when the Dutch was kicked out, or when the Dutch leave the archipelago. So when we became an independent state, what kind of law that possibly be adopted by Indonesian state. The debate at the time is actually culminated into the choice of taking the customary law or adat law that mostly based on Hindu, Buddhist, and Islamic traditions. The other option was to take or to adopt Islamic legal system, because predominantly Indonesia are predominantly Muslims, the follower of Muslim traditions or Muslim Islamic religions. And most of the sultanate that exists in Indonesia is also Muslim sultanate that already implements some form of legal system in their sultanate. So this huge debate actually exists in let's say 1940s, 1945, to define what kind of legal system that Indonesia will adopt for their futures. So the debate actually almost lead to a deadlock. Well, in fact, it's actually lead to some rebellion later on, because some group who insist to have Islamic state or a Muslim state rebels Indonesian government until 1970s, even 1960s, 70s, even until today. Still, some group of society within Indonesian society is still dreaming to have Indonesia as an Islamic state or Muslim state. But the options that was choose by the founding fathers, of course, what we call founding fathers is like Sukarno, Hatta, Shahrir, or Hashim Ash'ari from much more Muslim side, and others. A lot when they formulated the constitutions, they finally decided to take something that is actually quite dilemmatic in the sense that when they are willing to take, for example, customary law or adat law, then the question is which adat or which custom. Because if you go to Indonesian customary law, you will never find Indonesian customary law. What you will find is Aceh customary law. What you will find is Javanese customary law. What you will find is Buginese customary law. What you will find is the element of its subculture, because Indonesia is not exists at that time yet. So what you will find is actually the subculture. So let's say the predominantly Indonesian, the biggest Indonesian ethnic group is Javanese. Then the point is whether you will take Java as a Javanese legal customary law as a foundation for Indonesian society. Well, it may create problem because Sundanese people who live in West Java or people who live outside of Java will not agree with the decision of taking Javanese customary law as a foundation. So because of that, the founding fathers actually took a dilemmatic choice by keeping and taking Dutch legal system with some exceptions for for certain elements, meaning that you take the colonialist legal project from the Dutch, but taking also some element from Indonesian culture, because you have to accommodate somehow. The reason for not taking Islamic law, for example, Islamic tradition as a constitution, is because if you take Islamic law or Islamic constitutions, then of course half regions in eastern part of Indonesia will rebel and will not join with the project of Indonesian state because they are predominantly Christian, or even the Balinese will disagree because they are Hindu. So this dilemma, they could not take Islamic tradition, they could not take customary law or adat law as the foundation. Then instead they took the Dutch civil legal system, civil law system. Of course, common law and civil law system. Civil law is mostly continental European, while common law mostly are, of course, British, Australia, American legal system. So they took it dilemmatically with dilemma, but there is no other option other than taking, let's say, Dutch legal system. So because of that, if you want to summarize, Indonesia has what we call layers of legal cultures. Yeah, layers of legal culture that exist in Indonesia is based on first adat, which is the source of the adat is Hindu, Buddhism, and other cultures in Southeast Asia. And the second layer will be, let's say, Islamic law, legal culture, in which Islamic elements blended with Sufism and mostly are Sunni and Shafi'i. Shafi'i is one school of thought within Sunni Muslims. So you have Hanafi, you have Maliki, you have Shafi'i, you have Hambali. So one school of thought within Islamic tradition that is predominant in Indonesia, in South Asia, is Shafi'i, which is also a school of thought that you find in Egypt, for example. So that is the second layer. The third layer, then, what we call a civil law system adopted through colonialism with the coming of Western Christian people through trade initially, but then colonialisms. That is something that you have to really keep in your mind. So if you study about Indonesian legal system, you will have to remember the layers of legal culture, which is adat, Islamic law, and civil law legal system. All of this is actually can be summarized in one word that is become let's say the ideology of Indonesian state. The word Pancasila, the symbol of the bird here is actually the symbol of our country. But what is really important is actually the text that was held by the bird. So the bird holds something with the text. It's called Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, which means unity in diversity. Unity in diversity is the very key and foundations of Pancasila and key and foundation of Indonesia as a state ideology. Because the reason for that is because we really exist in diversity of ethnicity, diversity of culture, diversity of law, legal system. Pancasila was taken from a very important book, Negara Kartagama or Sutasoma, as I show you here. So basically, Bhinneka Tunggal Ika was taken from one of the Indonesian traditions, and now become the foundation of Indonesian ideology. So I hope you get the point. So to encapsulate all these layers and richness and complexity, then we have to create something that can accommodate everything in one word, which we call it Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, or unity in diversity. So to summarize, what is really exists in Indonesian legal system is what we call legal pluralism. So what is legal pluralism? Legal pluralism is basically a situation in which two or more legal systems coexist in the same social field. So imagine if you are in Australia, you have 2-3 legal systems, but I believe in Australia you have only one legal system, which is Australian legal system taken from the British tradition, from a common law tradition in the United Kingdom. But in Indonesia, you have at least 3 big culture or legal culture and legal system, what we call as adat law or customary law legal system. We call Islamic law, and we have civil law. So these 3 exist at the same time, and each of them are having their own jurisdictions. So how to accommodate all of this? To accommodate all of this, according to some scholars, Indonesians has experienced 3 styles or the approach to accommodate all this, complexity. The first one, what we call acculturations. The second one is assimilation, and the third one is compartmentalizations. So acculturation meaning that you just take it as it is a legal culture from outside to be part of you. In this case, of course, the Dutch penal code, the Dutch legal system in the early period of Indonesian independence, we took it almost blindly, what is the colonial project of legal system that is given by the colonial power to Indonesia at the time, because as I said, there is no choice. So we acculturate the Dutch legal system, especially penal legal system or criminal law, into Indonesian law. The second one is assimilations, in which you try to assimilate certain element from outside of your own legal system into part of you. It exists, for example, in marriage law, in which marriage law is a law in which it's formulated nationally, and it's applied for everyone, but it's mostly accommodated from Islamic legal traditions, of course, with adoptions from some other legal tradition as well. The third one is what we call compartmentalization, in which Islamic law is basically adopted, but it put in one sections of your system. In Indonesia, for example, at the moment, you have multiple judiciaries. Multiple judiciaries mean in Indonesia you have more than one court system, while in Australia you have one court system. In Indonesia you have 2 court system, what we call general court and what we call Islamic court. So Islamic court was adopted but compartmentalized with limited jurisdiction. So for example, in Indonesian legal system, Islamic court exists everywhere in the country. Even according to some research from Australian famous Australian Indonesianist, I don't know what to call it, but basically Australian scholar Tim Lindsay say that actually Islamic court is the busiest court in Indonesia, because most of the cases actually deal with family law. So Islamic court is having very limited jurisdictions, but is the busiest court everywhere in Indonesia. So for Islamic court at the moment, you have only jurisdictions on marriage, inheritance, wills or wasiat, and gifts or hibah, endowments, and Sharia economy. So basically, to make it simple, Islamic court mostly dealing with family laws issue or family law cases, and some Islamic Sharia business related cases, or what we call let's say Sharia business or Sharia economy. So all this is actually representations of the history and culture and layers that you have just learned from my previous presentations. So for example, in Indonesia, we have several books of law, what they call kompilasi hukum ekonomi syariah, for example, or the compilations of Islamic economic laws or Sharia laws. and you have also the compilation of Islamic law as a kind of guidelines and regulations that is implemented in Islamic law. So my question, and then the question is for everyone, for example, if you have three legal system or let's say two big legal system in Indonesia, and you have a case where you have to go, for example, let's say I'm a Muslim and I get married with let's say my wife. So when I want to get divorced, where should I go? Should I go to a Muslim court or should I go to general court? Or let's say you have case on inheritance from your parents, and you disputed with your brothers and with your sister. Where should you go? Should you go to the let's say Islamic court because it's family matters, or you should go to general court? Well, that's create a lot of complications until at least 2006, because almost all cases is actually under those jurisdiction, either the jurisdiction of general court or the jurisdiction of Islamic court. So because of that, until 2006, almost all Indonesians, especially Muslims, have what they call legal choice. What does legal choice mean? Mean that if I have case, I can choose whether I will go to Islamic court or I go to general court. But that creates a lot of complications, and there is no certainty, and there is no coherence in the system. And because of that, Indonesian legal system updated the law, their law, by issuing a new regulations. It's called Indonesian Laws Number 3, 2006, in which the legal choice that initially exists among Indonesians, Muslims especially, to choose which court they like was revoked. So was revoked or was cancelled. After 2006, Muslims only allowed to go to Islamic court for their cases, especially if it's dealing with family cases or dealing with Islamic finance or Islamic Sharia cases. Yeah. So this is the structures of what we call Indonesian judicial system. So if you see, you have sorry, this in Bahasa Indonesia, but it's called peradilan umum. If you can read slowly, peradilan umum. And you have also peradilan agama, meaning that you have two general court. Of course, ignore the military court, ignore the other court, because the focus at the moment is on the general court and Islamic court. In Indonesia, you have parallel court from the district level all the way to the provincial level and to the Supreme Court. So basically, you have first level, second level, and the third level. But interestingly, for the highest court in Indonesia, all the way going up to one institution, what we call Mahkamah Agung, or let's say High Court or Supreme Court. So although you have different court system at the district level or the first level, along the way you're going up for appeal, for example, or to for appeal, of course. Then you reach up, and at the very top you have only one single judiciary system, which we call Mahkamah Agung or Supreme Court, in which all case ultimately will reach that institutions. But within that institution, you have what we call kamar or rooms. There is room for Islamic related cases and room that is related to the general cases, just like in other countries. So you have to exist independent court, and at the end you have a relatively unified system in which within this unified body of Supreme Court you have kamar or rooms for cases in which the judges expert on this case will occupy that position. So this is kind of maybe uncommon or weird for non-Indonesians, because how come within one state, within one nation state, you have multiplicity of legal system. Not only the system, you have multiple legal court. or legal multiple court. Just to give you some more complications, actually this is already quite simplified, because before that you have another let's say another court system, which we call adat court or the customary court, but it's no longer the case, although adat laws was incorporated into the national law, but they doesn't have any independent judiciary mechanisms or independent court to execute the regulation, but instead it's incorporated into the whole national legal system. So at the moment in Indonesia, you have two general court, what we call the general court and Islamic court, that exists until today. But for Islamic court, they have a limited jurisdiction. Again, all these things exist at the moment is because of the long historical development of Indonesia and rich historical development of Indonesia, rich culture and ethnicity, and they have to find a balance between adopting element from outside and keeping the element that you have from your own culture, to make sure that you do not exclude a certain group or community, which is very important, but not also completely absorb or accommodate the interest of certain group. In this case, of course, the interest and the interest and the concerns of Muslim community that predominantly in in which Indonesia is a country with predominantly Muslim followers. So this is kind of finding balance and finding the accommodations. I don't know whether this explained to you or not, but that's all. It would be much easier if actually you directly sit here and have a dialogue and question and answer. But hopefully, when you come to Indonesia, we can have a direct conversations and dialogue, so we can elaborate more based on my presentation. But hopefully, what have been delivered to you give some clue or some clarifications before you come to Indonesia for your program. Okay, thank you so much for your attentions. See you inshallah when you come to Indonesia. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye.